The safe house in Virginia was unlike anything Marcus had experienced during his years of military service. Hidden deep in the countryside, surrounded by armed FBI agents, it felt more like a prison than protection. But after the intercepted communications revealed assassination plots against all the key witnesses, Marcus understood that this temporary confinement might be the only thing standing between him and a carefully orchestrated accident. FBI Director James Harrison arrived at the safe house 3 days after the civil trial verdict, carrying with him evidence that would transform the case from a civil lawsuit into one of the largest criminal investigations in American political history. Captain Ashford, the information provided by British intelligence has opened doors we never expected to walk through. We now have evidence connecting Senator Vance to not just arms trafficking, but murder, conspiracy, money laundering, and treason. Director Harrison spread photographs and documents across the table in the secure briefing room. The assassination plans we intercepted led us to investigate Senator Vance's previous activities more carefully. We've discovered that this isn't the first time he's ordered the elimination of people who threatened his interests. Marcus studied the photographs, recognizing faces from news reports about suspicious deaths over the past several years. Director Harrison, are you saying Senator Vance has had people murdered before? We have evidence suggesting that at least 6 individuals who posed threats to Senator Vance's activities have died in suspicious circumstances over the past 3 years. A journalist in Somalia who was investigating arms trafficking. A former aide who threatened to expose corruption. A defense contractor who tried to back out of illegal deals. None of these deaths were properly investigated because local authorities were either corrupt or intimidated. The scope of Senator Vance's criminal activities was staggering. What had begun as Marcus's discovery of arms trafficking had revealed a criminal enterprise that included murder, international money laundering, and potentially treasonous activities that threatened American national security. We're offering you and the other witnesses federal protection in exchange for your cooperation in criminal prosecutions. But I need you to understand what you're agreeing to. Senator Vance has resources and connections that reach into the highest levels of government. Some of his associates are prepared to commit any crime necessary to protect their interests. Marcus thought about Dr. Okafor, Agent Chun, Thomas Bradley, and all the others who had risked everything to expose the truth. Director Harrison, these people trusted me when I said that speaking up would lead to justice. I can't abandon them now when they need protection most. I'm glad you feel that way, Captain, because we're going to need your testimony in multiple criminal trials. The evidence you gathered during Senator Vance's London visit is the foundation for everything we've built since then. Over the next several days, Marcus worked with federal prosecutors to prepare testimony for criminal proceedings that would involve charges ranging from arms trafficking to murder conspiracy. The legal team explained that they were building cases not just against Senator Vance, but against an entire network of corrupt officials, defense contractors, and international criminals. Assistant U.S. Attorney Jennifer Walsh led the prosecution team and had gained a reputation for successfully prosecuting complex international crimes. She explained the challenges they would face in bringing Senator Vance to trial. Captain Ashford, we're dealing with a defendant who still has significant political influence and unlimited financial resources. He's hired the best lawyers money can buy, and they're already filing motions to dismiss all charges based on congressional immunity and executive privilege. Can he really claim immunity for murder and arms trafficking? He's going to try. His lawyers are arguing that his actions were part of his official duties as a senator involved in foreign policy. It's a ridiculous argument, but we need to be prepared for every possible legal challenge. The first major breakthrough in the criminal investigation came when Thomas Bradley, who had been released from the fabricated charges against him, provided additional evidence that he had hidden during his initial cooperation with the civil case. Bradley arrived at the safe house under heavy guard, carrying encrypted files that contained the complete financial records of Senator Vance's criminal enterprise. I kept these separate because I knew that if anyone discovered I had them, I would be killed immediately. The financial records revealed the true scope of Senator Vance's activities. Over 5 years, he had facilitated arms sales worth over $200 million, receiving commissions that totaled nearly $40 million. The money had been laundered through shell companies in the Cayman Islands, Switzerland, and Dubai, then used to fund political campaigns, bribe officials, and maintain the criminal network. These records show payments to specific individuals for specific services, Bradley explained. Bribes to customs officials, payments to rebel leaders, money transferred to assassins who eliminated threats to the operation. Agent Sarah Chun arrived at the safe house the following day with her own collection of evidence that she had been secretly gathering since Senator Vance's London visit. Her investigation had uncovered connections between the senator's arms trafficking and terrorist organizations in the Middle East and Africa. Senator Vance didn't care who he sold weapons to as long as they could pay his prices, Chun revealed. We have evidence of sales to groups that are officially designated as terrorist organizations by the State Department. The revelation that Senator Vance had knowingly provided weapons to terrorist groups elevated the charges against him to potential treason, which carried the possibility of the death penalty under federal law. Dr. Michael Okafor's arrival at the safe house brought the investigation full circle. The humanitarian aid worker carried with him additional evidence from the aftermath of the Khor massacre, including testimony from survivors who had witnessed the attack. Captain Ashford, I have statements from 12 survivors who saw the attack, Dr. Okafor reported. They all confirmed that the weapons used were new American rifles that had never been in the region before. Some of the weapons still had shipping tags attached. The survivor testimony provided direct evidence linking Senator Vance's specific arms shipments to specific acts of violence against civilians, strengthening the case for charges of crimes against humanity. As the prosecution team prepared for trial, they faced an unexpected development that would change the entire dynamic of the case. Senator Vance's former business partner, David Morrison, contacted the FBI with an offer to cooperate in exchange for immunity from prosecution. Morrison had been the primary intermediary for Senator Vance's arms deals, facilitating transactions and managing relationships with international buyers. His knowledge of the operation was comprehensive, and his willingness to testify provided the prosecution with an insider witness who could explain every aspect of the criminal enterprise. Morrison's cooperation gives us someone who can walk the jury through the entire operation step by step, Attorney Walsh explained to Marcus. He was present for conversations where Senator Vance explicitly ordered murders, discussed bribes to foreign officials, and planned the expansion of weapons sales to terrorist groups. But Morrison's offer to cooperate came with a price. He demanded witness protection for his family, financial compensation for his cooperation, and immunity from prosecution for his own role in the criminal activities. The ethical implications are complicated, Walsh admitted. Morrison is certainly guilty of serious crimes, but his testimony might be necessary to convict Senator Vance and dismantle the entire network. Marcus struggled with the idea of granting immunity to someone who had profited from the same activities that had resulted in innocent deaths. But he understood that sometimes justice required difficult compromises. The criminal trial began 6 months after the civil verdict, in a federal courthouse in Washington, D.C. that had been transformed into a fortress due to security concerns. The charges against Senator Vance included arms trafficking, murder conspiracy, money laundering, bribery, and providing material support to terrorist organizations. Marcus testified for 2 full days, providing the foundation for the prosecution's case by describing his initial discovery of Senator Vance's activities and the evidence he had gathered. His testimony was more detailed and comprehensive than in the civil trial, as the criminal charges required proof beyond a reasonable doubt. Captain Ashford, when you first overheard Senator Vance discussing arms sales during his London visit, did you understand that you were witnessing evidence of criminal activity? Prosecutor Walsh asked. Not immediately, but as I heard more details about bypassing oversight, bribing officials, and the senator's indifference to civilian casualties, I realized I was witnessing something far more serious than political corruption. David Morrison's testimony was the most damaging evidence presented against Senator Vance. For 3 days, he methodically described 5 years of criminal activities, providing details that only an inside participant could have known. Morrison, did Senator Vance ever explicitly order the murder of individuals who threatened his operations? Walsh asked. Multiple times. He was particularly concerned about journalists and former employees who might expose the arms trafficking. He told me that eliminating threats was just another business expense. Morrison's testimony included specific details about 6 murders that had been ordered by Senator Vance over the years, including the methods used and the amounts paid to the assassins. The evidence transformed Senator Vance from a corrupt politician into a serial killer who used murder as a business tool. The defense's strategy in the criminal trial was to discredit Morrison as a self-interested criminal who was lying to save himself from prosecution. But Morrison's detailed knowledge and documentation made his testimony impossible to dismiss entirely. Senator Vance chose not to testify in his own defense, a decision that allowed the prosecution's evidence to stand without challenge. His lawyers focused on technical arguments about jurisdiction and the admissibility of evidence, but they could not effectively counter the overwhelming proof of his criminal activities. The jury in the criminal trial deliberated for only 18 hours before reaching verdicts on all charges. Marcus was present in the courtroom when the foreman stood to read the decisions that would determine Senator Vance's fate. On the charge of conspiracy to commit murder, we find the defendant guilty. On the charge of international arms trafficking, we find the defendant guilty. On the charge of providing material support to terrorist organizations, we find the defendant guilty. On the charge of money laundering, we find the defendant guilty. The guilty verdicts continued for 23 separate charges, representing one of the most comprehensive criminal convictions of a sitting senator in American history. Senator Vance sat motionless as his political career and personal freedom were eliminated by the unanimous decisions of 12 ordinary citizens. Judge William Patterson, who had presided over the trial with extraordinary patience and fairness, addressed Senator Vance directly before imposing sentence. Mr. Vance, you held a position of extraordinary trust and responsibility as a United States Senator. Instead of using that position to serve the American people and promote justice, you used it to facilitate violence, profit from human suffering, and betray the fundamental principles of democratic government. The evidence presented in this trial has proven that you are directly responsible for the deaths of innocent civilians, including women and children, in pursuit of financial gain. You have provided weapons to terrorist organizations that threaten American security. You have ordered the murders of individuals who threatened to expose your crimes. Judge Patterson paused, allowing the weight of his words to settle throughout the courtroom. These crimes are so serious, so destructive to the fabric of civilized society, that they warrant the most severe punishment available under law. On the charges of providing material support to terrorist organizations and conspiracy to commit murder, I sentence you to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. On the remaining charges, I impose consecutive sentences totaling an additional 60 years in federal prison. The life sentence ensured that Senator Vance would never again be in a position to harm innocent people or corrupt American foreign policy. But, more importantly, it sent a message that even the most powerful politicians would be held accountable for their crimes. As Senator Vance was led away in handcuffs, Marcus felt a mixture of satisfaction and exhaustion. The journey from his initial discovery of suspicious conversations to this moment of ultimate justice had taken nearly 2 years and had transformed his life completely. In the months that followed the criminal conviction, the ripple effects of the case continued to expand. Congressional investigations led to the exposure of other corrupt officials who had enabled Senator Vance's activities. Defense contractors lost government contracts and faced their own criminal prosecutions. International arms control agreements were strengthened to prevent similar abuses in the future. Dr. Michael Okafor used his portion of the $100 million civil judgment to rebuild his clinic in Coram and establish a foundation to provide medical care for victims of armed conflict throughout Africa. His work continued to honor the memory of the 30 Elizabeth Morrison rose for her closing argument with the knowledge that the next hour would determine whether months of investigation, testimony, and personal sacrifice would result in justice or disappointment. The courtroom was absolutely silent as she approached the jury, carrying with her the hopes of everyone who had risked everything to expose Senator Vance's crimes. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, over the past 2 weeks you have heard testimony that reveals one of the most shocking cases of corruption and disregard for human life in modern political history. The evidence against Senator J.D. Vance is not circumstantial or speculative. It is direct, documented, and undeniable. Morrison gestured toward the evidence table, which held hundreds of documents, photographs, and recordings that had been presented during the trial. You have seen bank records proving that Senator Vance received over $15 million in payments from arms dealers. You have heard recorded conversations where his own voice admits to facilitating illegal weapons sales. You have seen photographs of innocent victims killed by weapons that he helped put into the wrong hands. She paused, allowing the weight of the evidence to settle in the minds of the jurors. But this case is about more than just financial corruption or political misconduct. This case is about 37 innocent people who died in quorum because Senator Vance chose profit over human life. This case is about a system of corruption that allows powerful individuals to commit crimes against humanity without consequences. Morrison walked closer to the jury, her voice carrying both sadness and determination. Dr. Michael Okafor traveled thousands of miles to testify in this courtroom, despite threats to his safety and his clinic. Why? Because he believes that the lives of those 37 victims matter. Agent Sarah Chun sacrificed her career in federal law enforcement to expose the truth. Why? Because she believes that no one is above the law. Captain Marcus Ashford gave up his quiet life of distinguished military service to pursue this case. Why? Because he believes that justice is more important than personal comfort. The prosecutor displayed photographs of the Quorum massacre victims on screens throughout the courtroom. The images were difficult to view, but Morrison knew they were necessary to remind the jury of the human cost of Senator Vance's actions. These are not abstract victims of distant conflicts. These are real people who died because Senator Vance facilitated weapons sales that he knew would result in civilian casualties. Maria Santos, age 8. James Okello, age 12. Sarah Mbeki, age 6 months. Their names deserve to be spoken in this courtroom because their deaths were not inevitable casualties of war. They were the direct result of Senator Vance's greed. Morrison then addressed the defense's attempts to justify Senator Vance's actions as legitimate foreign policy. The defense has tried to convince you that arms trafficking is somehow a normal part of international relations. This is not true. What Senator Vance did was not foreign policy. It was criminal enterprise disguised as diplomacy. She played brief excerpts from the recorded conversations where Senator Vance's voice could be heard discussing bribes and expressing indifference to civilian casualties. These are not the words of a public servant working to advance American interests. These are the words of a criminal who sees human suffering as an acceptable cost of doing business. Morrison's voice grew stronger as she approached the conclusion of her argument. The defendant has used every tool at his disposal to silence witnesses, intimidate families, and obstruct justice. But truth has a way of emerging despite the best efforts of those who would suppress it. The evidence in this case is overwhelming because Senator Vance's crimes were so extensive and so callous that they could not be hidden forever. She faced the jury directly for her final appeal. You have the power to send a message that will be heard around the world. You can declare that political power does not place anyone above the law. You can provide justice for innocent victims who died because of one man's greed. You can ensure that other families do not suffer the same losses. The choice is yours, and history will remember the decision you make today. Richard Crawford approached the jury with the confidence of a lawyer who had built his career on creating doubt in the minds of jurors facing overwhelming evidence. His strategy was to acknowledge the emotional impact of the prosecution's case while arguing that the legal standards for civil liability had not been met. Ladies and gentlemen, I do not stand before you today to defend every aspect of Senator Vance's conduct. Politics is a complicated business, and sometimes the decisions required to protect American interests are not pretty or comfortable for civilians to understand. Crawford's opening immediately drew objections from Morrison, but he was allowed to continue. What I am here to argue is that the prosecution has not proven that Senator Vance bears direct legal responsibility for the tragic events in Quorum or other locations where violence has occurred. The defense attorney displayed a timeline showing the complex chain of events between Senator Vance's arms deals and the massacre in Quorum. The weapons that Senator Vance helped facilitate went through multiple intermediaries before reaching the perpetrators of violence. There were dozens of opportunities for other actors to prevent these weapons from being misused. Crawford's argument essentially claimed that Senator Vance could not be held responsible for the criminal actions of others, even if his arms dealing had enabled those actions. The law does not hold individuals liable for every possible consequence of legitimate business activities, even when those activities involve weapons sales. He then attacked the credibility of the prosecution's witnesses, suggesting that they were motivated by personal animosity, financial gain, or political opposition to Senator Vance's conservative positions. Agent Sarah Chun had a documented history of disagreements with the senator's security policies. Thomas Bradley was fired from the senator's staff for poor performance and had obvious reasons to seek revenge. Even Captain Ashford's motivations are questionable when you consider that this lawsuit has made him famous and potentially wealthy. Crawford's attacks on the witnesses appeared to have little impact on the jury, who had been impressed by their obvious sincerity and willingness to sacrifice their careers to expose the truth. But his legal arguments about causation and responsibility were more sophisticated and potentially problematic for the prosecution. The prosecution wants you to believe that Senator Vance is responsible for every act of violence committed with weapons that were somehow connected to his business activities. This standard would make every defense contractor, every government official, and every weapons manufacturer liable for crimes they never committed and could never have predicted. Crawford concluded his argument by appealing to the jury's reluctance to convict a prominent American official based on the testimony of foreign witnesses and disgruntled employees. Senator Vance has served his country with distinction for decades. The prosecution asks you to destroy his career and reputation based on the word of individuals who have their own reasons for wanting to damage him. But Crawford's closing argument lacked the emotional power and factual foundation of Morrison's presentation. The recorded conversations where Senator Vance explicitly acknowledged that his actions would result in civilian casualties had undermined any claim that he was unaware of the consequences of his arms dealing. Judge Thornton's instructions to the jury were carefully crafted to address the complex legal issues involved in the case. She explained the standards for proving civil liability in cases involving international arms trafficking and clarified that the jury did not need to prove criminal intent beyond a reasonable doubt, only that Senator Vance's actions were more likely than not to have caused the damages claimed by the prosecution. You must determine whether the evidence proves that Senator Vance knowingly facilitated arms sales that resulted in the deaths of innocent civilians in Coram and other locations. You must also determine whether his actions were so reckless and callous that he should be held financially responsible for the damages caused. The jury deliberated for 3 days, during which time Marcus remained under constant security protection due to continued threats against his safety. The international media camped outside the courthouse, and political leaders in both Britain and America watched nervously as 12 ordinary citizens prepared to render judgment on one of the most powerful senators in Washington. During the deliberations, Marcus met with Elizabeth Morrison to discuss what would happen regardless of the verdict. Elizabeth, even if we lose this case, do you think we've accomplished something important? Marcus, you've already accomplished something historic. The evidence presented in this trial has been reported around the world. Senator Vance's career is effectively over, even if he escapes legal liability. More importantly, you've shown that ordinary people can stand up to corruption and abuse of power. On the third day of deliberations, Marcus received an unexpected visitor. Director Margaret Collins from MI6 arrived at his secure location with news that would change the entire landscape of the case. Marcus, we've been monitoring communications between Senator Vance's associates since the trial began. This morning, we intercepted a conversation where they discussed plans to eliminate key witnesses if the verdict goes against them. Marcus felt his blood run cold. Are you saying they're planning to murder people? We have evidence of plans to stage accidents involving Dr. Okafor, Agent Chun, and Thomas Bradley. They've also discussed options for making you disappear permanently. Senator Vance's people are convinced that eliminating the witnesses will prevent any criminal prosecutions that might follow a civil verdict. Director Collins showed Marcus transcripts of intercepted communications that revealed the extent of Senator Vance's desperation. The senator's allies were prepared to commit murder to protect their interests, proving that the corruption went far beyond arms dealing into organized criminal activity. Marcus, we're implementing immediate protection for all the witnesses, but this information changes everything. We now have evidence of conspiracy to commit murder, which gives us grounds for criminal prosecution regardless of the civil verdict. That afternoon, the jury sent word that they had reached a verdict. The courthouse was surrounded by additional security as everyone involved in the case prepared for what might be the most significant legal decision of the decade. Judge Thornton called the court to order, and Marcus felt his heart pounding as the jury foreman stood to deliver their decision. Senator Vance sat rigidly at the defense table, his political composure finally showing cracks under the pressure of the moment. On the charge of facilitating illegal arms trafficking resulting in civilian casualties, we find the defendant liable. The courtroom erupted in gasps and murmurs, but Judge Thornton quickly restored order. The jury foreman continued reading the verdict. On the charge of reckless disregard for human life in pursuit of financial gain, we find the defendant liable. On the charge of conspiracy to violate international arms control laws, we find the defendant liable. Marcus felt tears forming in his eyes as the verdicts continued. The jury had found Senator Vance liable on every count, validating months of investigation and the courage of everyone who had risked everything to expose the truth. Regarding damages, we award the plaintiffs the full amount requested, $100 million in compensatory and punitive damages. The $100 million verdict was the largest civil judgment ever awarded against a sitting American senator. But, more than the monetary amount, the verdict represented a complete vindication of Marcus's decision to pursue justice despite overwhelming odds. Senator Vance's reaction was immediate and predictable. He stood up and shouted at the jury, "This is a travesty of justice. This court has no authority to judge American foreign policy." His outburst confirmed what many observers had suspected about his character throughout the trial. Judge Thornton ordered Senator Vance to be seated and warned that any further disruptions would result in contempt charges. She then addressed the courtroom with words that would be quoted in history books. This verdict sends a clear message that no individual, regardless of political position or wealth, is above the law. The evidence presented in this case documented crimes against humanity that shocked the conscience of civilized society. The jury's decision provides justice for innocent victims and accountability for those who profit from human suffering. As court officers moved to maintain order, Marcus was immediately surrounded by his security detail and escorted from the courthouse through a crowd of international reporters. The verdict had already been transmitted around the world, and the political implications were only beginning to be understood. But, even as Marcus celebrated the legal victory, Director Collins's warning about assassination plans weighed heavily on his mind. The civil trial was over, but the real danger might just be beginning. Senator Vance had lost everything he had worked for politically, but he still had the resources and connections to eliminate the people who had destroyed his career. That evening, as Marcus sat in his secure location watching news coverage of the verdict, he received a call that would set in motion the final chapter of his confrontation with Senator Vance. "Captain Ashford, this is FBI Director James Harrison calling from Washington. We've received information from British intelligence about threats against your life and the lives of other witnesses. We're prepared to offer you protection in exchange for your cooperation in criminal prosecutions against Senator Vance." Marcus understood that the civil trial had been only the beginning. Now the real battle for justice would move to criminal courts, where Senator Vance would face charges that could result in life imprisonment. But first, they would all have to survive long enough to testify again. The verdict had been delivered, but the war between truth and corruption was far from over. The courtroom in London's Royal Courts of Justice had never seen anything quite like the security arrangements for Ashford versus Vance. Metal detectors, armed guards, and international observers filled every corner as the world's media prepared to witness what legal experts were calling the trial of the decade. Marcus sat beside Elizabeth Morrison, feeling the weight of history as he prepared to testify against one of America's most powerful senators. Judge Patricia Thornton, a respected figure with 30 years on the bench, called the court to order with unusual gravity in her voice. This case involves allegations of international arms trafficking, violations of humanitarian law, and corruption at the highest levels of government. I want to make clear that this court will examine the evidence without regard to political considerations or diplomatic pressures. Senator J.D. Vance sat at the defendant's table surrounded by a team of 12 lawyers led by Richard Crawford, whose reputation for destroying witnesses was legendary in legal circles. The senator appeared confident, even arrogant, as he surveyed the packed courtroom. His expensive suit and practiced political smile suggested a man who believed his influence would protect him even here. Elizabeth Morrison rose to deliver her opening statement, and Marcus felt his heart rate increase as she began laying out the case that had consumed their lives for the past 8 months. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, over the next several weeks you will hear evidence of crimes so shocking, so callous in their disregard for human life, that they will challenge your faith in the integrity of our political systems. The defendant, Senator J.D. Vance, has used his position of trust and authority to facilitate illegal arms sales that have resulted in the deaths of innocent civilians, including women and children. Morrison walked slowly toward the jury, her voice carrying the weight of moral conviction. You will hear testimony from witnesses who risked everything to expose these crimes. You will see documents proving that Senator Vance received millions of dollars in payments for arranging weapons shipments to rebel groups and criminal organizations. Most importantly, you will hear recorded conversations where the defendant explicitly acknowledges that his actions would result in civilian casualties and states that he simply doesn't care. The first witness was Agent Sarah Chun, whose testimony under oath carried the full authority of her position in the Secret Service. She took the witness stand with calm professionalism, but Marcus could see the tension in her shoulders as she prepared to testify against a senator she had once been sworn to protect. Agent Chun, please describe your role in investigating Senator Vance's activities, Morrison began. I was initially assigned to coordinate security for Senator Vance's diplomatic visit to London. During that assignment, I observed the senator engaging in conversations and activities that suggested involvement in illegal arms trafficking. Richard Crawford immediately objected, but Judge Thornton overruled him, allowing Chun to continue her testimony. The senator demonstrated detailed knowledge of weapons shipments, delivery schedules, and payment arrangements that went far beyond what would be appropriate for his official duties. When I began investigating further, I discovered a pattern of financial transactions connecting the senator to arms dealers and weapons manufacturers. Agent Chin's testimony continued for 3 hours, methodically laying out the financial evidence that proved Senator Vance had received substantial payments for facilitating arms sales. She presented bank records, wire transfers, and communications that showed a clear pattern of corruption extending over several years. During cross-examination, Crawford attempted to discredit Chun by suggesting that her investigation was motivated by personal animosity toward the senator, but her professional demeanor and detailed documentation made his attacks appear desperate rather than effective. The second day of testimony brought Dr. Michael Okafor to the witness stand, and his appearance created a powerful visual impact in the courtroom. The Nigerian humanitarian aid worker bore visible scars from the attack on his clinic, and his quiet dignity as he described the massacre provided a human face to the consequences of Senator Vance's actions. Dr. Okafor, please describe what happened at your clinic in Coram on the day of the attack, Morrison asked gently. We were treating patients, mostly women and children from the surrounding villages. It was early morning when we heard gunfire approaching. The rebels entered our clinic with brand new American weapons and began shooting indiscriminately. Dr. Okafor's voice remained steady as he described finding the bodies of patients and staff members, but Marcus could see tears in the eyes of several jury members as they listened to his testimony. Dr. Okafor, were you able to identify the specific weapons used in this attack? Yes. I documented everything because I suspected the weapons were not supposed to be in that region. The assault rifles had serial numbers and manufacturer markings that I photographed before local authorities arrived. Morrison presented Dr. Okafor's photographs to the jury, and the impact was immediate. Clear images of American-made weapons with visible serial numbers, contrasted against photographs of the victims they had killed, created an undeniable connection between Senator Vance's arms deals and specific acts of violence. Crawford's cross-examination of Dr. Okafor was particularly brutal, as he attempted to suggest that the doctor was lying about the source of the weapons or had somehow staged the evidence. But Dr. Okafor's calm responses and the obvious authenticity of his documentation made Crawford's attacks appear callous and desperate. "Mr. Crawford, I have spent my life trying to heal people and save lives." Dr. Okafor responded to one particularly aggressive question. "I have no reason to lie about what I witnessed. I am here because 37 innocent people died, and someone must speak for them." The third day brought Thomas Bradley to the witness stand, despite the legal challenges surrounding his arrest on fabricated charges. Judge Thornton had ruled that his testimony was crucial to the case and had ordered his temporary release to testify. Bradley appeared nervous, but determined as he described his 3 years working for Senator Vance. His insider knowledge of the senator's operations provided details that no outside investigator could have uncovered. "Mr. Bradley, did Senator Vance ever explicitly discuss his involvement in arms trafficking?" Morrison asked. "Multiple times. He would often brag about his ability to arrange weapons sales that bypassed normal oversight. He called it creative foreign policy and said that the profits helped fund his other political activities." Bradley then played several recorded conversations that he had secretly made during his time working for the senator. The jury listened in stunned silence as they heard Senator Vance's voice discussing bribes, kickbacks, and his knowledge that weapons he was facilitating would be used against civilian targets. In one particularly damning recording, Senator Vance could be heard saying, "Look, I don't care what happens to these weapons once they're delivered. My job is to make sure the payments keep coming. If some civilians get caught in the crossfire, that's the price of doing business in these regions." The impact of hearing Senator Vance's own words was devastating to his defense. Crawford objected repeatedly, arguing that the recordings had been obtained illegally, but Judge Thornton ruled that Bradley's safety concerns justified his secret documentation of potentially criminal conversations. When Marcus finally took the witness stand on the fourth day of the trial, the courtroom was packed with international observers, journalists, and legal experts who understood they were witnessing a historic moment. Marcus had spent months preparing for this testimony, but nothing could have fully prepared him for the intensity of speaking publicly about events that had changed his life forever. "Captain Ashford, please describe the events that led to your decision to file this lawsuit," Morrison began. Marcus spoke slowly and clearly, describing his assignment to protect Senator Vance during his London visit, the suspicious conversations he had overheard, and his growing realization that he was protecting a man who was profiting from violence and death. "I had taken an oath to protect not just individuals, but the principles of justice and honor that my service represented. When I realized that Senator Vance was directly responsible for the deaths of innocent civilians, I knew I had to act." Marcus's military bearing and obvious sincerity made a powerful impression on the jury, but he knew that Crawford's cross-examination would be the real test of his credibility. Crawford approached Marcus with the confidence of a predator sensing weakness, but his opening questions revealed a fundamental misunderstanding of military honor and duty. "Captain Ashford, isn't it true that you violated your oath by betraying the confidence of a man you were sworn to protect?" "Mr. Crawford, my oath was to protect the innocent and uphold justice. I could not continue protecting someone who was causing harm to the very people I was sworn to defend." "But you admit that you secretly listened to private conversations and documented confidential information?" "I documented evidence of crimes against humanity. When someone uses their position to facilitate violence against civilians, they forfeit any reasonable expectation of privacy." Crawford spent hours trying to portray Marcus as an unstable soldier seeking attention or financial gain. But Marcus's consistent responses and obvious moral conviction made these attacks appear ineffective and even unseemly. The most dramatic moment of Marcus's testimony came when Crawford asked him directly about his motivations for pursuing the lawsuit. "Captain Ashford, what do you hope to gain from this legal action?" Marcus looked directly at the jury as he responded. Mr. Crawford, I hope to gain justice for 37 innocent people who died because of Senator Vance's greed. I hope to ensure that other families don't suffer the same losses. And I hope to prove that no one, regardless of their political power or wealth, is above the law. The fifth day of testimony brought shocking new evidence when Elizabeth Morrison called CIA analyst Rebecca Martinez to the witness stand. Martinez had been granted immunity in exchange for her testimony about the intelligence community's knowledge of Senator Vance's activities. Ms. Martinez, was the CIA aware of Senator Vance's involvement in illegal arms trafficking? Yes. We had been monitoring his activities for over 2 years. We had documented evidence of his financial transactions, recorded his conversations with arms dealers, and tracked the weapons shipments he facilitated. Why was no action taken to stop these activities? Martinez looked uncomfortable as she answered. We were instructed by senior officials that Senator Vance's political position made him untouchable. We were told to continue monitoring, but to take no enforcement action. The revelation that the CIA had been aware of Senator Vance's crimes but had been ordered to ignore them sent shockwaves through the courtroom. Judge Thornton had to call for order as observers reacted audibly to this admission of institutional corruption. Crawford's cross-examination of Martinez was particularly aggressive, as he attempted to challenge her credibility and suggest that she was violating national security by testifying. But Martinez's detailed documentation and obvious reluctance to testify actually enhanced her credibility with the jury. On the sixth day, Morrison called a series of expert witnesses who analyzed the financial evidence and weapons trafficking patterns. Dr. Amanda Richardson, a forensic accountant from Oxford, traced the flow of money from arms dealers to Senator Vance's various accounts and shell companies. The financial patterns clearly show payments totaling over $15 million over 3 years, with each payment corresponding to specific weapons shipments, Dr. Richardson testified. The timing and amounts of these transactions eliminate any possibility that they were coincidental or legitimate. Colonel James Wright, Marcus's friend from military intelligence, testified about the broader implications of Senator Vance's activities for international security and arms control efforts. Senator Vance's actions undermined years of diplomatic efforts to control weapons flows to conflict regions, Wright explained. His facilitation of illegal arms sales contributed to regional instability and directly resulted in civilian casualties. As the prosecution's case drew to a close, Morrison felt confident that they had presented overwhelming evidence of Senator Vance's guilt. But she also knew that Crawford had built his reputation on his ability to create reasonable doubt even in seemingly hopeless cases. Crawford's defense strategy became clear when he began calling his own witnesses. Rather than denying the evidence against Senator Vance, he attempted to justify the senator's actions as necessary components of American foreign policy that had been misunderstood by naive observers. General William Hayes, a retired Pentagon official, testified that arms sales to unconventional groups were sometimes necessary to maintain American influence in unstable regions. Senator Vance was operating within a gray area of foreign policy that requires difficult decisions, Hayes claimed. These are complex geopolitical situations that military personnel like Captain Ashford are not trained to understand. But Hayes's testimony was undermined during cross-examination when Morrison forced him to admit that he had no specific knowledge of Senator Vance's activities and was speaking only in general terms about foreign policy. Crawford also called several character witnesses who testified about Senator Vance's military service and his public support for veterans' causes. But their testimony seemed hollow when contrasted with the evidence of his profit-driven disregard for human life. The defense's case was further damaged when Crawford called Senator Vance himself to testify. The senator's arrogance and political doublespeak created a stark contrast with the honest testimony of the prosecution witnesses. Senator Vance, did you receive payments in connection with arms sales? Morrison asked during cross-examination. I received legitimate consulting fees for my expertise in defense matters, Vance replied evasively. Senator Vance, are you aware that weapons you helped facilitate were used to kill innocent civilians? I categorically reject any suggestion that I bear responsibility for the criminal actions of others who may have misused weapons that were legitimately transferred. Senator Vance's inability to give direct answers to simple questions undermined his credibility with the jury. His political training had taught him to avoid taking responsibility, but in a courtroom setting, his evasiveness appeared calculating and dishonest. The most damaging moment for Senator Vance came when Morrison played the recorded conversations where his own voice could be heard discussing bribes and expressing indifference to civilian casualties. "Senator Vance, is that your voice on these recordings?" Those conversations were taken out of context. They don't represent my true positions on these matters. "Senator Vance, in what context would it be appropriate to say that civilian casualties are the price of doing business?" Vance had no answer that would satisfy the jury, and his stammering response made him appear both callous and dishonest. As the trial entered its final phase, both sides prepared their closing arguments with the understanding that they had witnessed something unprecedented. Never before had a sitting American senator been subjected to such detailed scrutiny of alleged war crimes, and never before had the evidence been so comprehensive and damning. Marcus sat in the courtroom knowing that regardless of the verdict, he had already achieved something important. The truth about Senator Vance's crimes had been exposed to the world, and the courage of witnesses like Agent Chun, Dr. Okafor, and Thomas Bradley had shown that even the most powerful individuals could be held accountable for their actions. But, as he prepared to hear the closing arguments, Marcus also understood that the real battle was just beginning. A verdict against Senator Vance would send shockwaves through the American political establishment and potentially expose corruption that reached far beyond one senator's greed. The death threat arrived in Marcus's mailbox on a cold February morning, 3 days after news of his lawsuit against Senator Vance dominated international headlines. The envelope bore no return address, and inside was a simple typewritten message: "Some secrets are worth killing for. Drop the lawsuit or face the consequences." Marcus showed the letter to Detective Inspector Sarah Williams from Scotland Yard's Special Protection Unit, who had been assigned to his case after the lawsuit became public. Her expression was grim as she studied the paper. "Captain Ashford, we need to discuss your security arrangements immediately. This isn't an idle threat. Our intelligence suggests that Senator Vance has connections to people who have no qualms about eliminating problems." "Detective Inspector, I knew the risks when I filed the lawsuit. I won't be intimidated into abandoning this case. I admire your courage, but courage without caution gets good people killed. We're implementing a protection detail starting today." The protection detail became Marcus's new reality as his legal team prepared for what promised to be the most publicized lawsuit of the decade. Elizabeth Morrison had assembled a formidable group of international lawyers, investigators, and expert witnesses, but she warned Marcus that they were facing opponents with unlimited resources and powerful political connections. "Marcus, Senator Vance has retained Crawford and Associates, one of America's most ruthless legal firms. They specialize in destroying the credibility of anyone who threatens their clients. We need to be prepared for them to attack every aspect of your character, your service record, even your personal relationships." The attacks began within days. Conservative media outlets in America started running stories questioning Marcus's mental health, suggesting that his accusations against Senator Vance were the delusional fantasies of a soldier suffering from post-traumatic stress. They dug into his military service, twisting his heroic actions in Afghanistan into evidence of instability and poor judgment. More disturbing were the personal attacks on his family. Marcus's elderly parents, retired teachers living quietly in Yorkshire, found themselves harassed by reporters and subjected to invasive background checks. His sister Emma, a nurse in Manchester, was followed by private investigators who attempted to dig up any embarrassing information about the Ashford family. "This is exactly what they want," Elizabeth Morrison explained during a strategy meeting. "They want to make the cost of pursuing this lawsuit so high that you'll abandon it voluntarily. Senator Vance's team is betting that you'll choose to protect your family over seeking justice for the victims of his arms dealing." Marcus felt the weight of responsibility pressing down on him as he realized how his decision was affecting innocent people who had never asked to be part of this battle. But every time he considered backing down, he remembered the conversation he had overheard, the casual way Senator Vance had discussed the deaths in Coram as acceptable collateral damage in his profitable arms business. The first major breakthrough came when Agent Sarah Chun, the Secret Service agent who had worked with Marcus during Senator Vance's visit, contacted Elizabeth Morrison's office with explosive new information. "I've been conducting my own investigation into Senator Vance since your client filed his lawsuit," Agent Chun explained during a secure video call. "What I've discovered corroborates everything Captain Ashford reported and goes far beyond what we initially suspected." Agent Chun had uncovered financial records showing that Senator Vance had received over $15 million in payments from arms dealers over the past 3 years. The money had been laundered through a complex network of shell companies and offshore accounts, but Chun had traced the transactions back to their sources. The payments correspond exactly with weapons shipments to conflict zones in Africa and South America. We're not talking about legitimate defense contracts. These are sales to rebel groups, terrorist organizations, and criminal cartels that use the weapons against civilian populations. Elizabeth Morrison leaned forward in her chair. "Agent Chun, would you be willing to testify in this case?" "I've already requested protection from the FBI. My superiors have tried to pressure me to drop my investigation, but I've documented everything. Senator Vance's corruption goes to the highest levels of government." The addition of Agent Chin's testimony transformed the lawsuit from a single witness accusation into a comprehensive case with multiple sources of evidence. But it also escalated the danger for everyone involved. Within 48 hours of Agent Chun joining the legal team, her apartment in Washington was burglarized, though nothing valuable was taken. The message was clear: nobody was safe from Senator Vance's reach. Marcus found himself living in a strange new world of constant security precautions, encrypted communications, and carefully planned movements. His detail from Scotland Yard's Special Protection Unit had grown to include around-the-clock surveillance, and he could no longer visit his parents or sister without putting them at risk. The psychological pressure was intense, but Marcus drew strength from the growing number of people who were stepping forward to support his case. Veterans organizations in both Britain and America issued statements backing his lawsuit. Human rights groups provided funding for the legal battle. Most importantly, families of victims from the Coram massacre reached out through intermediaries to express their gratitude that someone was finally seeking justice for their lost loved ones. Senator Vance's response to the mounting evidence was to go on the offensive. He held a press conference in Washington, flanked by American flags and senior Republican leaders, denouncing the lawsuit as a foreign attack on American sovereignty. "This is nothing more than a desperate attempt by foreign intelligence services to undermine American leadership," Senator Vance declared, his voice filled with righteous indignation. "Captain Ashford is being used as a pawn in a larger conspiracy to damage America's reputation and weaken our defense capabilities." The senator's performance was masterful political theater, but Elizabeth Morrison noticed something crucial in his statements. "Marcus, listen carefully to what he didn't say. He never explicitly denied the arms dealing allegations. Everything he said was about foreign conspiracies and attacks on America, but he never said, 'I did not facilitate illegal arms sales.'" The legal team used Senator Vance's careful word choices to craft their strategy. If the senator was avoiding direct denials, it suggested that he knew the evidence against him was too strong to risk perjury charges. 3 weeks after Agent Chun joined the case, Marcus received a call that changed everything. The caller identified himself as Dr. Michael Okafor, a humanitarian aid worker who had been in Coram during the massacre. "Captain Ashford, I read about your lawsuit in the international news. I was there when those weapons killed 37 innocent people. I have photographs, medical records, and witness statements that prove those weapons came from the shipment that Senator Vance facilitated." Dr. Okafor's evidence was devastating. He had documented not just the aftermath of the massacre, but had photographed the weapons themselves, including serial numbers that could be traced back to American manufacturers and the specific shipment that Senator Vance had arranged. "The rebels who attacked our clinic were using brand new American assault rifles," Dr. Okafor explained during a secure video call. "These weren't old weapons that had circulated for years. They still had factory tags and documentation showing they had been shipped to intermediaries just weeks before the attack." The photographs Dr. Okafor provided were difficult to view. Images of children who had been caught in the crossfire, medical equipment destroyed by gunfire, And, most damning of all, clear pictures of the weapons that had been used in the attack. Each photograph was time-stamped and GPS tagged, creating an unbreakable chain of evidence connecting Senator Vance's arms deals to specific acts of violence. Elizabeth Morrison knew they had built an unprecedented case, but she also understood that Senator Vance would not go down without fighting back with everything he had. Marcus, we need to be prepared for them to escalate their tactics. They've tried intimidation and character assassination. The next phase will likely involve attempts to destroy our evidence or eliminate key witnesses. The accuracy of Morrison's prediction became clear when Dr. Okafor's clinic in Nigeria was raided by armed men claiming to be government officials. They seized computers, medical records, and research files. But Dr. Okafor had anticipated such an attack and had already transferred all critical evidence to secure locations. They're getting desperate, Agent Shin observed during a strategy meeting. These kinds of heavy-handed tactics suggest that Senator Vance knows we have enough evidence to destroy him. The question is whether we can get to trial before they succeed in eliminating the evidence or the witnesses. The breakthrough that would ultimately seal Senator Vance's fate came from an unexpected source. Thomas Bradley, a former aide to the senator, contacted Elizabeth Morrison's office after reading about the lawsuit in the Washington Post. "I worked for Senator Vance for 3 years," Bradley explained during his initial interview. "I kept detailed records of everything because I suspected something wasn't right about his business dealings. When I tried to raise concerns internally, I was fired and threatened with prosecution if I ever spoke about what I had witnessed." Bradley's records were a prosecutor's dream. He had documented phone calls, meeting notes, financial transactions, and private conversations that provided a complete insider's view of Senator Vance's arms-dealing operation. Most importantly, he had recorded several conversations where the senator explicitly discussed bribes, kickbacks, and his knowledge that the weapons he was facilitating would be used against civilian targets. In one conversation, Senator Vance told a defense contractor that he didn't care what happened to the weapons after they were delivered, as long as the payments kept coming, Bradley revealed. He specifically said that civilian casualties were the cost of doing business, and that he wasn't going to let humanitarian concerns interfere with profitable transactions. The recorded conversations were the smoking gun that transformed the lawsuit from a civil case into potential criminal proceedings. Elizabeth Morrison immediately contacted international prosecutors about pursuing war crimes charges, while simultaneously strengthening their civil case for damages. But Thomas Bradley's cooperation came at a terrible personal cost. Within days of providing his testimony, he was arrested on fabricated charges related to his previous government work. Senator Vance's allies and law enforcement had manufactured evidence of security violations and financial improprieties, effectively silencing Bradley by making him a defendant rather than a witness. Marcus watched the systematic destruction of everyone who tried to help expose Senator Vance's crimes, and felt a mixture of rage and determination. "Elizabeth, how many more people have to be destroyed before we can get justice?" "Marcus, I won't lie to you. This is the most challenging case I've ever handled. We're not just fighting Senator Vance. We're fighting a system that protects powerful people who commit crimes in the name of national security and economic interests. But we have something they don't expect. What's that? We have the truth, and we have people who are willing to sacrifice everything to expose it. Senator Vance's power comes from staying in the shadows, operating through intermediaries, and maintaining plausible deniability. By forcing this into open court, we're dragging him into the light where his crimes can be examined by the world." The decision to proceed to trial despite the mounting pressure came after a particularly disturbing incident. Marcus's elderly father suffered a heart attack after being confronted by men claiming to be journalists, but who were clearly attempting to intimidate the family. While his father recovered, the message was unmistakable. Even family members were not off limits in Senator Vance's campaign of intimidation. "That's it," Marcus told Elizabeth Morrison. "No more delays. No more waiting for the perfect moment. We're going to trial, and we're going to expose every detail of what this man has done." Elizabeth nodded grimly. "I agree. But, Marcus, once we enter that courtroom, there's no turning back. Senator Vance will use every resource at his disposal to destroy you. Are you absolutely certain you're prepared for that?" Marcus thought about the 37 victims in Coram, about Dr. Okafor risking his life to provide evidence, about Agent Chin sacrificing her career to expose the truth, about Thomas Bradley sitting in a jail cell for trying to do the right thing. Elizabeth, I've been preparing for this my entire life. Every oath I've taken, every principle I've lived by, has led to this moment. Senator Vance thinks his power makes him untouchable, but he's about to learn that some people can't be bought, intimidated, or silenced. The trial date was set for 6 months later, giving both sides time to prepare their cases. But even as the legal machinery moved forward, Marcus knew that the real battle was just beginning. Senator Vance had built his career on the belief that money and political influence could overcome any obstacle. Marcus was about to test that belief against the power of truth and the courage of people who refused to be silenced. As he prepared for the legal fight of his life, Marcus received one final piece of evidence that would prove crucial in the upcoming trial. A whistleblower from within the CIA contacted Elizabeth Morrison with classified documents showing that American intelligence agencies had been aware of Senator Vance's arms-dealing activities for years, but had been ordered to ignore them due to his political connections. The documents revealed that Senator Vance's illegal activities had been documented by multiple intelligence agencies, photographed by surveillance operations, and reported up the chain of command, only to be buried by officials who prioritized political considerations over law enforcement. "This is it," Elizabeth Morrison said as she reviewed the CIA documents. "This proves that Senator Vance's crimes weren't just known by the government. They were actively covered up. We're not just suing him for damages anymore. We're exposing a system of corruption that goes to the heart of American foreign policy." Marcus looked at the classified documents and felt a mixture of vindication and horror. Vindication that his accusations were fully supported by the government's own investigations, but horror at the realization that Senator Vance had been allowed to continue his deadly arms dealing because powerful people found it politically convenient to look the other way. The stage was set for a trial that would capture the world's attention and determine whether justice could prevail against the combined forces of political power, unlimited financial resources, and institutional corruption. Marcus had come too far to back down now, but he understood that the coming months would test every ounce of courage and determination he possessed. The royal guard who had once stood silently protecting others was now standing up to be counted, ready to face whatever consequences came from speaking truth to power. The morning rain drummed against the windows of the royal palace as Captain Marcus Ashford adjusted his red ceremonial uniform for what he believed would be just another routine day. At 34, Marcus had dedicated 12 years of his life to the royal guard, earning medals for bravery and respect from every member of the royal family he protected. His sharp blue eyes and tall, athletic frame made him an imposing figure, but it was his unwavering sense of duty that truly set him apart from his peers. Marcus had no idea that this rainy Tuesday morning would change the course of his entire life forever. He certainly couldn't have imagined that by evening, he would discover evidence that would lead him to file a lawsuit against one of America's most powerful senators. The path to that moment began with what seemed like a simple assignment. "Captain Ashford, report to the briefing room immediately," came the voice through his radio. Marcus straightened his shoulders and made his way through the familiar corridors of the palace, his polished boots echoing against the marble floors. The briefing room held 5 other guards, all looking serious as Colonel Harrison, their commanding officer, stood at the front with a thick folder in his hands. "Gentlemen, we have a special assignment," Colonel Harrison announced, his weathered face showing the strain of 30 years in military service. "Senator J.D. Vance from the United States will be visiting next week for diplomatic meetings with Her Majesty. This is a high-profile visit with significant security implications." Marcus felt a slight unease at the mention of Senator Vance's name, though he couldn't quite place why. He had heard the name in news reports, something about the senator's rising influence in American foreign policy, but nothing that would explain the strange feeling in his gut. "Captain Ashford, you'll be the primary liaison for the senator's security detail. You'll coordinate with both American Secret Service agents and our own intelligence services. I'm trusting you with this because of your exemplary record and your ability to handle sensitive situations with discretion." Yes, sir, Marcus replied, accepting the thick briefing folder. When does the advance team arrive? Tomorrow morning. The Americans are sending Agent Sarah Chun, one of their best. You'll work closely with her to ensure every detail is perfect. The senator has specifically requested tours of several military facilities, which adds complexity to our security arrangements. That evening, Marcus sat in his small apartment near the palace, studying the briefing materials by lamplight. Senator Vance's biography was impressive on paper. Harvard Law School graduate, decorated Army veteran, rising star in the Republican Party with strong positions on defense, spending, and international security. The senator had built his reputation on supporting military families and veterans' rights, which should have made Marcus feel more comfortable about the assignment. Yet something nagged at him as he read through the senator's recent speeches and voting record. There were subtle inconsistencies, patterns that didn't quite match the public image. Vance had voted for increased military spending while simultaneously cutting funding for veteran health care. He had publicly supported arms reduction treaties while privately meeting with defense contractors who profited from weapons sales. Marcus told himself he was overthinking things. Politicians were complicated, and their decisions often involved factors that military men like himself didn't fully understand. His job was to protect the senator, not judge his politics. The next morning brought Agent Sarah Chun, a sharp-eyed woman in her early 30s who carried herself with the confidence of someone who had faced down serious threats. Her handshake was firm, and Marcus appreciated her direct communication style immediately. Captain Ashford, I've reviewed your service record. Impressive work in Afghanistan and your counterterrorism operations. I'm glad we're working together on this. Thank you, Agent Chun. I've prepared a preliminary security assessment for the senator's visit. What specific concerns does your team have? Sarah opened her tablet and pulled up a map of the planned route. Senator Vance has enemies, Captain. His positions on defense spending have made him powerful friends, but also dangerous adversaries. We've received intelligence about potential protests, and there are always concerns about international actors who might want to disrupt American diplomatic efforts. As they walked through the planned route, Sarah shared more details about the senator's background. She mentioned his business connections, his relationships with defense contractors, and his influence over military appropriations. Marcus found himself asking more questions than usual, driven by that persistent feeling that something wasn't quite right. Agent Chun, can you tell me more about the senator's business interests before he entered politics? Sarah glanced around to ensure they weren't being overheard. Officially, he divested from all business interests when he took office. Unofficially, his family trust still has connections to several defense companies. It's not illegal, but it creates potential conflicts of interest that we have to be aware of. That afternoon, Marcus received an unexpected call from his old friend Lieutenant Colonel James Wright, who now worked in military intelligence. James's voice carried an urgency that immediately put Marcus on alert. Marcus, I need to see you privately. Tonight. The usual place. The usual place was a small pub near the Thames where they had often met during their younger days in the service. Marcus arrived to find James already there, nursing a pint, and looking uncharacteristically nervous. James, what's this about? It's about your assignment with Senator Vance. Marcus, I need you to be very careful. There are things about this man that aren't in any official briefing. James leaned closer, lowering his voice even though the pub was nearly empty. 6 months ago, we intercepted communications suggesting that someone high up in the American government was facilitating arms sales to unauthorized buyers. The trail went cold, but not before we identified several suspicious meetings involving American defense companies and intermediaries from conflict zones. Marcus felt his stomach tighten. Are you saying Senator Vance is involved? I'm saying be careful what you see and hear during his visit. And if you notice anything unusual, anything at all, you need to tell me immediately. The weight of James's words stayed with Marcus as he prepared for the senator's arrival. He found himself paying closer attention to every detail of the security briefings, every aspect of the planned itinerary. When he learned that Senator Vance specifically requested to visit the Royal Arsenal and meet with British defense officials, Marcus felt that nagging unease grow stronger. The senator's arrival was flawlessly executed. Marcus stood at attention as the motorcade pulled up to the palace, watching as Senator J.D. Vance stepped out with the confidence of a man accustomed to power. The senator was younger than Marcus had expected, perhaps 45, with silver-touched hair and the kind of practiced smile that politicians perfect over years of campaign appearances. "Captain Ashford, I presume," Senator Vance said, extending his hand. "I've heard excellent things about the Royal Guard. I'm looking forward to working with you this week." There was nothing obviously wrong with the senator's demeanor, but Marcus found himself studying the man's expressions, listening carefully to his words. During the initial palace tour, Vance asked detailed questions about security procedures, guard rotations, and communication systems. The questions seemed reasonable for a visiting dignitary, but they were more specific than most guests required. The first real red flag came during lunch with senior palace officials. Senator Vance was discussing American defense policy when he made an offhand comment about recent arms sales to African nations. He mentioned specific details about weapons shipments and delivery schedules that seemed unusual for a senator to know so precisely. Marcus caught Agent Chin's eye across the room and saw a flicker of concern in her expression. After lunch, she approached him discreetly. "Captain, did the senator's comments about African arms sales strike you as odd?" "Extremely odd. How would he know those operational details unless he was directly involved in the transactions?" "That's what I was thinking. I'm going to make some calls to Washington. Can you keep a close eye on his interactions with your defense officials?" That evening, Marcus found himself in an impossible position. His duty was to protect Senator Vance, but his growing suspicions suggested that the man might be involved in something far more serious than political corruption. When the senator requested a private meeting with the Minister of Defense, Marcus positioned himself where he could observe without appearing to eavesdrop. The conversation he overheard changed everything. Senator Vance was discussing specific weapons systems, delivery methods, and payment structures for arms sales that bypassed normal diplomatic channels. He mentioned contacts in Somalia, Libya, and Chad who could facilitate transactions away from oversight committees. Marcus felt his blood run cold as he realized what he was hearing. This wasn't just political corruption or questionable business dealings. Senator Vance was actively facilitating illegal arms sales to unstable regions, profiting from weapons that would likely be used against innocent civilians. The moral weight of the discovery hit Marcus like a physical blow. He had sworn an oath to protect not just the royal family, but the principles of justice and honor that the crown represented. How could he continue protecting a man who was profiting from violence and death? That night, Marcus called James Wright. "James, I need to see you immediately. And bring everything you have on those intercepted communications about arms sales." When they met at the pub an hour later, Marcus shared what he had overheard. James's face grew pale as he listened to the details. "Marcus, this is bigger than either of us imagined. If Vance is directly facilitating these sales, we're talking about violations of international law, conspiracy to commit war crimes, and potentially treason. What do I do? I'm supposed to protect him, but I can't be complicit in this." James was quiet for a long moment, staring into his drink. "You document everything. Every conversation, every meeting, every suspicious interaction. And when his visit is over, we take what we have to the authorities." "What authorities? If he has this much influence in the American government, who can we trust?" "We start with our own intelligence services. And, Marcus, there's something else you should know. Those arms sales you heard him discussing, they're connected to the massacre in Coram 3 months ago. 37 civilians died, including women and children, killed with weapons that shouldn't have been in that region." The weight of that revelation nearly brought Marcus to his knees. 37 innocent people dead because of weapons that Senator Vance had helped put into the wrong hands. The man he was sworn to protect was directly responsible for the deaths of families, children who would never grow up because of his greed. Marcus spent the rest of the night staring at the ceiling, grappling with the most difficult decision of his military career. By morning, he had made his choice. He would continue protecting Senator Vance's physical safety as duty required, but he would also gather every piece of evidence he could to ensure that justice was eventually served. The next 3 days of the senator's visit became the most challenging of Marcus's career. He maintained his professional demeanor while carefully documenting every suspicious conversation, every unusual request, every detail that might later prove crucial in building a case against the senator. Senator Vance seemed to trust Marcus completely, perhaps viewing him as just another ceremonial guard. The senator made increasingly careless comments about his business dealings, his connections with arms dealers, and his plans for expanding weapons sales to new markets in Africa and South America. The final piece of evidence came on the senator's last day in London. Marcus overheard a phone conversation where Vance explicitly discussed payments he had received for facilitating arms sales, mentioning specific amounts and Swiss bank account numbers. The senator was so confident in his perceived immunity that he spoke openly about bribes, kickbacks, and his plans to use his political influence to block investigations into illegal weapons trafficking. As Senator Vance's motorcade departed for the airport, Marcus felt a mixture of relief and determination. The visit was over, but his real work was just beginning. That evening, he met with James Wright and several senior intelligence officials to share everything he had witnessed and documented. "Captain Ashford, this is explosive material," said Director Margaret Collins from MI6. "If what you've documented is accurate, we're looking at one of the largest arms trafficking operations involving a sitting American senator in modern history." "What happens next?" Marcus asked. "We coordinate with American intelligence agencies we trust, and we help build an airtight case. But, Marcus, you need to understand the risks. Senator Vance has enormous political influence and vast financial resources. If he discovers what you've uncovered, you could face serious retaliation." Marcus thought about the 37 civilians who died in Coram, about the families destroyed by weapons that Senator Vance had helped put into circulation. "Director Collins, those people who died deserve justice. Whatever the risks to me personally, I can't let this continue." The decision to pursue legal action against Senator Vance came after weeks of careful coordination between British and American intelligence services. The evidence Marcus had gathered, combined with intercepted communications and financial records obtained through intelligence channels, painted a clear picture of systematic corruption and illegal arms trafficking. When Marcus's lawyer, Elizabeth Morrison, first reviewed the evidence, she was stunned by its scope and clarity. "Captain Ashford, this is the kind of case that defines careers. You're talking about filing a $100 million lawsuit against one of the most powerful politicians in America. Are you absolutely certain you want to proceed?" Marcus looked out the window of Morrison's London office, thinking about the oath he had taken as a young soldier to protect the innocent and uphold justice. "Ms. Morrison, I've never been more certain of anything in my life. Senator Vance has blood on his hands, and he's profited from the deaths of innocent people. If we don't stop him, more people will die." The lawsuit was filed 3 weeks after Senator Vance returned to Washington, sending shockwaves through both the American and British political establishments. The $100 million figure represented not just compensation for the damages caused by the senator's actions, but a statement that some crimes against humanity could not be measured in mere dollars. As Marcus prepared for what would become the legal battle of his lifetime, he knew that he had crossed a line from which there would be no return. He had chosen justice over personal safety, moral courage over comfortable silence. The Royal Guard, who had once stood silent and vigilant, was now speaking truth to power in the most public way possible. The first death threat arrived 2 days after the lawsuit became public knowledge. What happens when a decorated Royal Guard, sworn to protect the most powerful monarchy in the world, discovers that a rising American senator has been secretly profiting from arms deals that put innocent lives at risk? What unfolds is a legal battle so explosive, so filled with international intrigue and personal betrayal, that it threatens to topple governments and expose corruption at the highest levels. This isn't just another lawsuit. This is the story of Captain Marcus Ashford, a man who gave everything to serve his country, only to watch a powerful politician destroy the lives of people he was meant to protect. When Marcus uncovers evidence that Senator J.D. Vance orchestrated illegal weapons sales that led to a massacre in a small African nation, he makes a decision that will change everything. Armed with nothing but his military training, an unshakable moral compass, and evidence that could bring down one of America's most influential politicians, Marcus launches a $100 million lawsuit that will expose secrets both governments desperately want to keep buried. But This royal guard underestimated just how far powerful people will go to protect their empire of lies. From the marble halls of Parliament to the shadowy corners of international arms dealing, from courtrooms filled with the world's best lawyers to late-night threats that could silence him forever, Marcus Ashford's fight for justice becomes a battle for his very survival. The testimony you're about to read stunned everyone in that courtroom. The evidence presented changed everything we thought we knew about honor, duty, and the price of speaking truth to power. This is the true story of how one man's courage to stand up against corruption sparked a legal earthquake that shook two nations to their core. Get ready for a journey that will make you question everything you believe about justice, power, and the lengths people will go to protect their darkest secrets. Because when a royal guard takes on a U.S. senator, the stakes couldn't be higher, and the consequences will leave you breathless.